The first time anyone saw Thomas Blackfeather since his return from the war was at Murphy's trading post in Red Springs. 3 months had passed since he'd come home from Afghanistan. 3 months of hiding in the abandoned copper mine outside town. His black hair hung past his shoulders, caked with dust and sweat. His eyes, once sharp as obsidian, now carried the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Coffee and jerky, he muttered to old Murphy, laying down crumpled bills that trembled in his hand. Murphy had known Thomas since he was a boy, remembered when he'd won the state wrestling championship at 17, remembered the day he'd enlisted. After 9/11, he'd watched this strong young Apache man transform into something else entirely. "You've been living rough, Tom," Murphy said, not as a question but a gentle observation. Thomas grabbed his supplies and vanished back into the desert before Murphy could offer more words. The shopkeeper would later tell the story to Sarah Mitchell. When she came looking for information about the area's abandoned mines, research for her dissertation on Native American mining traditions, Sarah had arrived in Red Springs 3 weeks ago from Columbia University. Her grandmother was Apache, and she'd spent summers on the reservation as a child, learning songs and stories from the elders. But this project was different. She needed to understand how the land itself held memory, how traditional songs could map underground spaces better than any geological survey. That evening, as the sun painted the canyon walls orange and purple, Sarah made her first descent into Eagle Canyon. She carried her recording equipment, planning to test the acoustics of the ancient cave system. The Apache had sacred songs for every landscape feature, songs that could bounce off walls and reveal hidden passages. She didn't know she wasn't alone. Thomas had been living in the deepest chamber of the mine for weeks. He'd chosen it because the darkness matched his thoughts, because the weight of the earth above felt familiar, like the pressure in his chest that never let up. PTSD, the doctors called it. But they hadn't been there when his unit was ambushed in the Kunar Valley. They hadn't held Jensen's hand as he shook his head violently, trying to dislodge the memory. That's when he heard it. A voice, clear as water, singing words he hadn't heard since childhood. His grandmother's voice had carried the same melody when she'd taught him to track deer, to read the desert wind. But this voice was different, like honey and thunder woven together. Sarah stood at the cave entrance, testing the echo patterns with an Apache traveling song. The words spoke of journeys through stone corridors, of finding one's way home by sound alone. As she sang, she noticed how each phrase seemed to paint the cave's architecture in waves of sound, revealing passages that weren't visible to the eye. Deep in his chamber, Thomas pressed his palms against the rock wall, feeling the vibrations of the song pass through stone and into his bones. It had been 8 months since he'd felt anything but numbness and rage. For the next 3 hours, Sarah continued her work, moving deeper into the cave system, leaving trail markers and mapping the acoustic properties of each chamber. She was so focused on her research that she missed the fresh footprints in the soft cave floor, missed the empty ration wrappers tucked behind a boulder. She returned the next day and the next. Each time she brought new songs, songs her grandmother had taught her about healing and strength, songs that had helped her people survive forced migrations, diseases, and the systematic stripping away of their culture. Thomas began to expect her. He'd position himself where he could hear without being seen. Sometimes, in the spaces between songs, he caught himself humming along. The first time this happened, he'd clapped a hand over his mouth, shocked by the sound of his own voice, attempting something other than the screams that woke him in the night. On the 5th day, Sarah performed a song she'd never recorded before. The Warrior's Return Song. It was meant to cleanse returning fighters of the violence they'd carried home, to help them lay down their weapons and remember their place in the web of family and community. The words spoke of eagles returning to their canyon, of young men washing war paint from their faces, of finding peace in the land that had birthed them. As she sang, she thought about her research, about how these songs were more than cultural artifacts. They were medicine. In the darkness, Thomas covered his face with his hands. The song seemed to peel back layers of hardness he'd built since returning from Afghanistan. For the first time, he allowed himself to remember the good moments too, his squad laughing over care packages from home, teaching his buddies how to identify desert plants, the pride in his commanding officer's eyes when Thomas had navigated them safely through a sandstorm using techniques his grandfather had taught him. On the seventh day, Sarah brought something different, a hand drum made of elk hide. She played it while singing, the rhythm echoing off the cavern walls like a heartbeat, amplified 1,000 times. The sound reverberated through the stone, through Thomas's ribcage, synchronizing with his own pulse. As she finished the warrior's return song that day, she heard something she'd never heard before in the caves, the sound of weeping. It was soft but unmistakable, carried by the acoustic perfection of the chamber. Sarah's heart raced. She'd heard stories about spirits in these mines, about Apache warriors who'd hidden here during forced relocations, who'd never been found. But this crying sounded too real, too human, too recent. "Hello?" she called out, her voice bouncing back from a dozen different passages. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her, heavy and expectant. She tried again, this time singing a simple melody that Apache children learned first, a song of welcome, of peace, of one human being recognizing another. The melody was gentle, non-threatening, a musical equivalent of extending an open hand. Thomas had retreated deeper into the cave, but his hands still shook. The song had broken something in him, not destructively, but like dawn breaking through, a storm. He wanted to run, wanted to lose himself further in the darkness, but his grandmother's teachings rose unbidden in his mind. When someone sings to you, your heart must answer, or the song dies. Sarah waited, letting the echoes fade. She gathered her equipment and marked the day's findings in her notebook. Unusual acoustic phenomenon in Chamber 7, possible presence of air currents suggesting undiscovered passages, and she hesitated before writing it, signs of recent human activity. The next morning she arrived to find something that made her freeze, a small bundle wrapped in red cloth at the cave entrance. Inside was a piece of turquoise, raw and unpolished, and beneath it 3 eagle feathers bound with horsehair. These were offerings, given in the traditional way when one Apache wished to enter another's sacred space. Sarah understood immediately. Someone had been listening to her songs, watching her work. Someone was seeking connection, but wasn't ready for direct contact. She added her own gift to the bundle, a small packet of cornmeal, traditional food for journeys and ceremonies. That day, she sang songs of thanks, of hope, of gradual healing. She positioned herself in the main chamber where the acoustics were best, knowing that wherever her listener was, they would hear clearly. As the afternoon light slanted through the cave entrance, painting the rock walls with golden light, Sarah began the most powerful song her grandmother had taught her, the transformation song. It told the story of a warrior so wounded by war that he could no longer speak, could no longer smile, could no longer dream of anything but death. The song described how this warrior retreated to a cave beneath the mountains, how he lived in darkness until a medicine woman's voice reached him. It spoke of his slow transformation, like a bear emerging from hibernation, like a snake shedding its skin, like an eagle learning to fly again after a broken wing had healed. In his hidden chamber, Thomas wept openly now. The song wasn't just heard, It was experienced, each word a touch healing invisible wounds. His breathing slowed for the first time in months. The tightness in his chest, always there like a fist squeezing his heart, began to loosen. As Sarah sang the final verses about the warrior rejoining his people stronger for having journeyed through darkness, she heard footsteps. Slow, tentative, getting closer. She didn't turn around, didn't stop singing, but she felt a presence enter the chamber behind her. The song ended with a descending phrase that spoke of homecoming. In the silence that followed, Sarah could hear ragged breathing, the sound of someone struggling with emotion. "I was in the Kunar Valley," a voice said, rough from months of disuse. "3rd Infantry Battalion. We lost—" He couldn't finish. Sarah remained very still. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said softly. "My grandmother was Jicarilla Apache. She taught me these songs." "Blackfeather," he said after a long pause. "Thomas Blackfeather, your songs. They're the first thing that's made sense since I've been back." She risked a glance over her shoulder. In the golden light filtering into the cave, she saw a tall figure silhouetted against the darkness of the deeper tunnels. His hair was long and unkempt, his beard thick, his clothes worn and dirty. But it was his eyes that struck her. Deep, brown, carrying a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. "Would you like to hear more songs?" she asked. He nodded, then seemed to realize she was facing forward again. "Yes," he said aloud. For the next hour, Sarah sang. She sang songs of the 4 directions, songs about the sacred mountains, songs about the connection between sky and earth. Thomas gradually moved closer, finally sitting against the cave wall, about 20 feet from her. When she finished, the sun had set, and the cave had fallen into blue twilight. "I should go," she said, "but I'll come back tomorrow, if that's all right." "Wait," he said quickly. "The Warrior's Return song, does it have other verses?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah smiled in the darkness. "Many. It takes 3 days to perform the complete version. It's used in a healing ceremony. I don't know if I can be healed," he said. "My grandmother always said healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about finding a way to carry it that doesn't break you." Thomas was quiet for so long, she thought he might have retreated into the shadows. Finally, he spoke. "I haven't slept without nightmares since Afghanistan. Last night, after your songs, I slept until dawn for the first time." "That's a beginning," Sarah said gently. She gathered her equipment and made her way toward the cave entrance. As she stepped into the cooling evening air, she heard his voice one more time. "Thank you." The next morning, she found the offerings bundle had grown. Beside her cornmeal and his turquoise were 3 small stones, arranged to point toward the sunrise. That day, Thomas emerged earlier. He sat in a spot where the light touched him, but shadows still offered their comfort. As Sarah sang, she noticed he'd cleaned himself somewhat. His hair was damp and pushed back from his face, revealing strong features marked by the lines of hard experience. Between songs, they talked. Thomas spoke haltingly about Afghanistan, about moments that haunted him. Sarah shared stories about her academic work, about trying to bridge the gap between traditional knowledge and modern understanding. "My uncle is from the Mescalero Reservation," Thomas said during one of these conversations. "He served in Vietnam. When he came back, he couldn't enter a hogan for months. The enclosed space reminded him of the tunnels. My aunt sang him back." "Did it work?" Sarah asked. "Took 2 years, but he learned to drum again and started teaching the young ones. He's the one who told me about these caves when I first came back." Thomas looked down at his hands. "I thought I just needed time alone. But time alone with nightmares, it's not healing." That afternoon, Sarah sang the complete Warrior's Return song, all 17 verses. When she reached the part about laying down weapons, Thomas stood up and drew something from his pocket. It was a combat knife in a worn leather sheath. With deliberate movements, he placed it on a rock between them, then stepped back. "I've been carrying this since I got home," he said, "sleeping with it under my pillow. It made me feel safe, but it kept me in that other place." Sarah understood the significance of the gesture. She continued singing, weaving the warrior's journey back to peace. As the last notes echoed through the chamber, Thomas began to laugh, a rusty sound at first, as if he'd forgotten how, but it grew stronger, more genuine. "I just realized," he said, "your songs, they work better than any therapy they gave me at the VA." "Different medicine," Sarah replied. "But Apache people have been using music for healing longer than there's been a VA." Before she left that day, Thomas made a request. "Tomorrow, could you bring that drum again? I used to drum when I was younger. I think I'd like to." "Try again." Sarah felt a surge of hope. "I'll bring it." True to her word, she arrived the next morning with the elk-hide drum and a second one from her car, a smaller hand drum her grandmother had given her years ago. Thomas emerged earlier than before, drawn by the possibility of making music rather than just listening. His hands trembled slightly as he took the larger drum, but when he struck it the first time, his expression transformed. The sound seemed to awaken something in him. They began with simple rhythms. Sarah showed him patterns she'd learned, and Thomas's hands gradually steadied. Then something remarkable happened. Muscle memory kicked in, and he began playing rhythms he'd learned as a child but hadn't touched in decades. "My grandfather taught me this one," he said, playing a complex pattern that spoke of thunderclouds building. "We'd drum for rain during dry seasons." For the first time since returning home, Thomas felt a connection to his past, to his culture, to another human being who understood. As their drums played together, he found himself telling Sarah things he hadn't been able to voice to anyone. The fear that never left him, even in safe places, the guilt of surviving when others hadn't. The way sounds in the grocery store could send him diving for cover. "The worst part," he admitted, "is feeling like I don't belong anymore. Not in the military, not back here. I'm some kind of ghost." Sarah's hands continued their steady rhythm. In the old stories, warriors who return from the spirit world, from war, they're never quite the same. But they're not supposed to be. They carry wisdom that can help the whole people, but only after they've found their way back. As the afternoon stretched on, more memories surfaced, good ones this time. Thomas talked about his squad, about the camaraderie that had formed under impossible conditions. He talked about local Afghan families who'd helped them, about moments of unexpected beauty in that harsh landscape. "You know what I miss most?" he said suddenly. "The stars. Over there, when we were out in the mountains, the sky was so clear. You could see everything. Here, with all these lights, we miss half the universe." "There's a place about an hour from here," Sarah said thoughtfully. "Painter's Bluff. Nothing but desert for miles. Apache scouts used to use it as a lookout point. The sky opens up completely." Thomas looked toward the cave entrance, where late afternoon light filtered in. "I haven't driven at night since I got back. The headlights, they remind me of tracer fire." "We don't have to go at night," Sarah said. "Sunset and pre-dawn are beautiful there too." They made plans to visit Painter's Bluff the next day, but that night, as Sarah reviewed her research notes, by lamplight, she realized something profound had happened in that cave, something that went beyond her academic work. Her songs hadn't just mapped the acoustic properties of ancient spaces. They'd mapped a path for a lost warrior to find his way home. And in witnessing his emergence from darkness, she was discovering her own connection to traditions she'd studied but never truly experienced. The next morning, they met at the cave. As usual, but this time, both carried day packs for their expedition. Thomas looked different, cleaner, more alert. He'd trimmed his beard and tied his hair back. The wild edge that had defined him when they first met had softened into something more focused. "Ready?" Sarah asked. He took a deep breath. "Ready to try." They drove in Sarah's Jeep, taking back roads that avoided heavy traffic. Thomas sat tensely at first, his hand gripping the door handle, but as they left the town behind and entered open desert, his shoulders gradually loosened. At Painter's Bluff, they hiked up a gentle slope to a flat overlook. The view stretched endlessly in all directions, red rock formations, distant mountains, and a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon. "It's like Afghanistan in some ways," Thomas said, surprising himself by making the comparison without flinching. "But the energy is different. This land, it feels peaceful." They spent the day there, alternating between companionable silence and conversation. Sarah worked on transcribing her cave recordings, while Thomas simply sat, letting the desert wind wash over him. Around noon, they shared the lunch Sarah had packed. "You know," Thomas said, watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead, "before I deployed, my grandfather made me promise to come see him when I got back. He wanted to do a blessing ceremony. I've been too ashamed to go. I'm not the person who left." "Maybe that's exactly why you should go," Sarah suggested. As the sun began its descent, painting the clouds in impossible colors, Thomas pulled out the 2 drums Sarah had brought. Without discussing it, they began to play together, their rhythms braiding with the wind and the fading light. The drumming attracted attention. From the brush below their overlook, 3 men emerged, ranchers by the look of them, surprised to find others at this remote spot. "Evening," the eldest called up. "Didn't expect company out here." Sarah and Thomas stopped playing. Thomas tensed slightly, but Sarah waved them up. "We were just enjoying the sunset. Plenty of room." As the men climbed the last few feet to the overlook, Thomas recognized them, the Johnson brothers, whose family had owned land near the reservation for generations. Dave, the eldest, had been a couple years ahead of him in high school. "Tommy Blackfeather." Dave squinted. "Heard you were back from overseas." "That's right," Thomas said carefully, waiting for the familiar questions, the platitudes about service and sacrifice that always felt hollow. But Dave just nodded and found a spot to sit. "Dad always said this was the best place to clear your head. Brought us here after Mom passed." The 5 of them watched the sunset together in comfortable silence. As darkness approached, the stars began to appear, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Thomas lay back on the rock, overwhelmed by the sight he'd missed for so long. "Back in Afghanistan," he found himself saying, "we had a saying, 'The stars see everything, forgive everything.' It was supposed to be comforting, but sometimes it felt like too much weight, all that seeing, all that knowing." Jake, the youngest Johnson brother, spoke up. "My cousin came back from Iraq spring of last year, said for months he could only look at the stars for a minute at a time. Too many memories attached to star navigation, to night ops." Thomas turned, his head surprised by the understanding in the young man's voice. "How is he now?" "Better. Took him a while to find his footing, but he's working with the Veterans Center in Tucson now, helping other guys transition. Says it's like learning to walk on different ground, same feet, different earth." As the stars wheeled overhead, the conversation deepened. The Johnson brothers shared stories about their father's time in Korea, about uncles and cousins who'd served. Thomas found himself contributing more than he'd expected, describing the lunar nature of Afghanistan's mountains, the way sand got into everything, the surprising moments of beauty amid the brutality. Sarah listened, occasionally adding context from her grandmother's stories about warriors from different eras. She spoke about the Apache scouts who'd served with the U.S. Army, about their unique position as both native warriors and American soldiers. When the night grew cold, Dave produced a thermos of coffee laced with whiskey. They passed it around, the warmth welcome as the desert temperature dropped. "You know," Dave said eventually, "we've been thinking about redoing the old Murphy place, the one that borders tribal land, turning it into something useful. Therapy center maybe, or just a quiet place for veterans. Dad always believed these lands had healing in them." "Your father was a good man," Thomas said. "He used to hire Apache ranch hands when a lot of folks wouldn't. Learned more from your people than we ever taught them," Dave acknowledged. "Always said Apache know how to listen to the land, how to find water where others see only desert." As they prepared to leave, Sarah felt moved to sing one more song, a night blessing song her grandmother had taught her. Her voice carried across the dark desert, speaking of stars as ancestors watching, of desert winds carrying prayer, of finding one's path even in darkness. When she finished, the men sat quietly for a moment. Then Jake spoke. "My girlfriend's grandmother is Hopi. She says music creates bridges where words can't reach." They packed up their things, but before they left, Dave turned to Thomas. "You know where to find us, Tom, if you ever need anything. Sometimes just having land to walk on without questions can help." Back in her Jeep, driving the dark roads toward town, Sarah asked, "How was that, being around other people?" "Better than I expected," Thomas admitted. "I kept waiting for the anxiety to hit, but—" He paused, searching for words. "Maybe it was the stars. Maybe it was hearing other people talk about struggle without judgment. Maybe it was the drumming. I don't know, but I felt connected, not like before Afghanistan, but different, like I could find a new way to be." When they parted that night, at the cave entrance, Thomas hesitated before speaking. "My grandfather lives about an hour from here, on the reservation. I think I'm ready to see him tomorrow. Would you maybe come with me? He'll want to meet the person whose songs helped bring me out of the dark." Sarah felt the weight of what he was asking, to be part of this next step, this facing family and community. "Of course," she said. "I'd be honored." The next morning, they set out for the reservation. Thomas drove this time, his hands steady on the wheel. As they crossed onto tribal land, he pointed out landmarks: the small church where he'd learned to say in Apache, the school where he'd excelled in math and disappointed his basketball coach by choosing cross-country instead, the powwow grounds where he'd won his first dance competition. His grandfather, Henry Blackfeather, lived in a traditional house on a small rise overlooking a valley. The old man was outside when they arrived, working on a piece of silverwork. In the morning sun, he stood slowly as they approached, his eyes finding his grandson first, then Sarah. For a long moment, grandfather and grandson stood looking at each other across the distance of years and war. Then Henry opened his arms, and Thomas stepped into them, both men holding on for a long time. When they finally separated, Henry turned to Sarah. "Thank you," he said simply, "for helping him find his way back." Inside the house, surrounded by family photographs and the smell of fry bread, Thomas told his story, the real story, not the proud homecoming narrative he'd offered when he first returned. He spoke about the darkness, about the cave, about the songs that had reached him. His grandfather listened without interrupting, nodding slowly. When Thomas finished, Henry said, "I knew you would come when you were ready. The cave spirits have their own timing." He disappeared into another room and returned with a ceremonial bundle. "I've been keeping this for your return. It belonged to your great-great-grandfather, who was a scout. He knew that warriors must sometimes walk alone to remember who they are before they can walk among the people again." The bundle contained a warrior's shirt adorned with beadwork in traditional patterns, and a medicine pouch made from the hide of his great-great-grandfather's first deer hunt. "Tonight," Henry continued, "we will do the purification ceremony. Tomorrow, the blessing. I have sent word to the others. They will come." Thomas looked alarmed. "Others? "Your story has traveled while you were in the cave," his grandfather explained. "Many families have sons and daughters returning from war. Many are struggling to find their place. When they heard of the songs in the caves, they became hopeful." Sarah understood immediately. He means they want to see that healing is possible. As the day progressed, people began arriving. Not just family, but friends, neighbors, and strangers, all with connections to warriors struggling with return. By evening, about 50 people had gathered, sharing food and stories around a large fire pit in Henry's yard. Among them were other veterans from Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. They recognized something in Thomas's eyes that others missed, and their presence created a safety net of understanding. As darkness fell completely, Henry prepared for the purification ceremony. He explained to Sarah that as an outsider who had brought healing, she had earned the right to witness this most sacred ritual. The ceremony took place in a sweat lodge just beyond the house. As steam rose from heated stones and Henry poured water, singing old songs, Thomas shed the accumulated weight of war. In that sacred space, surrounded by ancestors' songs and the prayers of his community, he finally allowed himself to grieve for fallen friends, for lost innocence, for the young man who had left and could never truly return. When they emerged from the lodge into the cool night air, Thomas looked fundamentally changed. The haunted quality that had defined him was still present, but no longer dominated his features. He had found a way to carry his experience without being crushed by it. The group gathered around the fire again, and someone produced drums. What followed was not performed entertainment, but a healing circle where everyone who wished could drum, sing, or simply listen. Veterans shared songs from their own healing journeys. Young people learned rhythms that connected them to warrior ancestors they'd only known from stories. Sarah was invited to share her songs, the ones that had reached into the darkness of the cave and called a warrior home. As she sang, she saw understanding dawn on many faces. These weren't just songs of entertainment or historical interest. They were living medicine, as relevant now as they had been for generations. During a break in the music, Thomas's grandfather spoke to the gathered people. "We have witnessed something important tonight. Our young warrior entered darkness and found his way back through the power of song. But this healing belongs to all of us. Every family here knows the struggle of welcoming warriors home. Tonight we begin a new tradition." He proposed that the cave where Thomas had found his healing could become a place for other veterans seeking similar refuge. Sarah's songs could be shared and learned. The community could support those returning warriors who needed time alone, with the land before rejoining the human world. As the fire burned lower and people began to drift home, making plans to return in the morning for the blessing ceremony, Thomas found a moment alone with Sarah. "I don't know how to thank you," he began. "You don't need to," she replied. "This is how healing works. It creates circles. Today you received it, tomorrow you will help someone else. Will you stay a while longer? Not just tomorrow, but help us learn what you've learned. Help us create something here that can help other warriors." Sarah looked at the stars, at the faces illuminated by firelight, at the drummer still maintaining a gentle rhythm in the background. Her academic research had led her here, but what she'd found was so much more than data for a dissertation. "Yes," she said finally, "I'll stay." That night, as Sarah slept in the guest room of the Blackfeather house, she dreamed of singing stones and warrior eagles. In the main room, Thomas slept without nightmares for the second time since his return, and in the cave below Eagle Canyon, the echoes of ancient songs mixed with new ones, creating harmonies that would call other lost warriors home. The morning brought blue skies and the smell of pinon burning. Sarah woke to find Henry's wife, Maria, preparing a massive breakfast for the growing crowd. More people had arrived overnight, drawn by word of mouth and that mysterious Apache grapevine that could stretch across hundreds of miles of desert. "He told them about you," Maria said, nodding toward the gathering people. "About the songs, about hope." Outside, Thomas stood at the edge of the property, looking toward Eagle Canyon in the distance. He'd woke before dawn, dressed in the ceremonial shirt his grandfather had given him. The weight of it felt different from his combat gear, lighter somehow, despite the stories woven into every bead. A young woman approached him, introducing herself as Rachel Lopez. Her brother had died in Syria, and her cousin was currently holed up in an abandoned mining office outside Santa Fe. "I've been trying to reach him for months," she said. "His mom's worried sick. When I heard about the cave, about the songs..." She handed Thomas a piece of paper with an address. "Could you maybe try? If you've been there, if you know what helps..." Thomas felt something shift inside him. The weight he'd carried wasn't just his own story anymore. "I'll try," he said, "but it's not just about songs. It's about time, and patience, and letting the earth work through you." The blessing ceremony began at noon. Henry built a sacred fire using wood from 4 different trees, each representing a compass direction. The smoke carried prayers skyward. A cedar and sage smoldered. About 60 people formed a circle, including Sarah, who'd been asked to bring her drums. David Johnson and his brothers arrived with unexpected guests, 3 Afghan interpreters they'd helped resettle in New Mexico. One of them, Rashid Ahmed, carried a tabla drum and a smile that transformed when he saw Thomas. "Brother," Rashid called out, using the word he'd learned from Thomas's squad. "They told us about the singing cave. In Afghanistan, we also believe. Mountains hold healing." Thomas hadn't seen Rashid since the day they'd airlifted him out with gunshot wounds. They embraced hard, both men battling emotion. Sarah watched this intersection of worlds, Apache tradition, American military brotherhood, Afghan heritage, all finding common ground on this day. The ceremony wove together traditional elements with spontaneous moments. When Henry presented Thomas to the 4 directions, asking for guidance from the spirits, Sarah added layers of harmony to the elders' chants. Her grandmother's songs married perfectly with these Mescalero Apache prayers, creating something both ancient and new. During the feast that followed, stories flowed like wine. Veterans from different wars shared what had helped them find peace. A Vietnam vet named Marcus told how he'd gotten a horse and rode the desert for 6 months straight, talking to the animals instead of people until he could handle human conversation again. "Desert doesn't judge," he said. "Desert just lets you be." Sarah scribbled notes, realizing her research had stumbled onto something profound, how traditional healing methods could address modern warriors' wounds. These weren't just cultural performances, they were active medicine. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Thomas stood to speak. Silence fell immediately. 10 days ago, I was ready to die. Not to kill myself, I couldn't do that to my family. But I was ready to disappear into that cave until I faded away. His voice carried clearly in the desert air. Sarah's songs reached places my doctors couldn't touch. They reminded me who I was before the war, and who I could be after. He looked at Rachel Lopez. "Your cousin needs more than songs. He needs time. He needs this." He gestured at the gathered community. "But first, he needs someone who's been in that darkness to sit with him in it. I'll go." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "But that's for tomorrow," Thomas continued. "Today, I have something to ask. You all came here for healing, for hope. I want to ask for your help in returning to the cave. There's a healing ceremony my grandfather mentioned, one that needs exactly 50 Apache to witness and support. It's for me, yes, but it's also for all of us." Heads nodded, hands raised. More than 50 people volunteered immediately, but Henry stepped forward. "The number 50 speaks to completion," he explained. 7 groups of 7, plus 1 who stands apart as witness. We choose carefully those who will make the journey to the cave. That night, Henry and the elders selected the 50, a mix of ages, including children, elders, veterans, healers, and what Henry called bridge people, like Sarah and the Johnson brothers. Each person selected committed to bringing an offering and to maintaining sacred silence during the journey. 2 days later, just before dawn, the procession gathered. Sarah had spent the intervening time with the elders, learning specific songs for the warrior's return ceremony. The full ritual, she learned, involved 3 stages: descending into darkness, finding light within, and emerging reborn. The group approached Eagle Canyon on foot, each person carrying a backpack with offerings and supplies. The morning air held the freshness of recent rain. As they descended into the canyon, the walls seemed to exhale a coolness that had waited millennia for this gathering. Thomas led them to the cave entrance, then stepped aside. He would be the last to enter, as tradition demanded. Henry placed a blessing on the threshold before crossing it. The procession moved in sacred silence through the upper chambers, following paths illuminated by handheld battery lanterns and traditional torches. Sarah had mapped the route, but today she experienced it differently, not as a researcher, but as a participant in an ancient ritual given new life. In the main chamber, where Sarah had first sung to Thomas, the group arranged themselves in a circle. Children sat cross-legged near the elders. Veterans clustered on one side, their different uniforms and eras creating a visual timeline of service. Healers positioned themselves at compass points, each carrying bundles of sacred herbs. The ceremony began with purification. Sage smoke spiraled upward, finding ancient ventilation shafts that hadn't been seen by human eyes in centuries. Sarah's academic mind noted the perfect natural engineering while her spirit engaged with the ritual. Henry began chanting in Apache, his voice surprisingly strong for his years. The elders joined, then the entire assembly. Words Sarah had learned, phonetically now carried meaning, as the community's intentions strengthened them. The sound, built until the cave itself, seemed to vibrate with song. Then came the descending into darkness phase. Thomas retreated to his chamber, the one where Sarah's songs had first reached him. But unlike before, he wasn't alone. 5 veterans, including Marcus and Rashid, joined him. They would share their own darkness, making his isolation a connection. 3 hours, the women's voices dominated. Sarah led songs about finding strength in surrender, about how caves became wombs for rebirth. Mothers and sisters sang about waiting for warriors to return, about keeping hearth fires burning through long nights. In the warrior's chamber, men shared stories they'd never told their families. Rashid spoke about surviving the ambush that had nearly killed him, about the guilt of living when friends had died. A Korean war vet named Joseph described how he'd turned to alcohol for 20 years before finally finding healing through ceremony. Thomas listened more than he spoke, absorbing the truth that his story echoed countless others. The cave walls held their words, seemed to mingle them with older stories of Apache warriors who'd used these same chambers for similar purposes. The second phase, finding light within, began when Sarah sang the cave's heartbeat song. Her voice started alone, pure and high, echoing conditions of the largest chamber. Gradually, drums joined. First Henry's hand drum, then the tabla Rashid had brought, then drums the Johnsons had provided. Children approached the center of the circle, bringing drawings they'd made of their warrior relatives. These weren't careful, realistic portraits, but wild expressions of pride, fear, and love. A 7-year-old named Elena placed her picture of Thomas near his offering stone. She'd drawn him with wings like an eagle. As the drumming continued, something shifted in the cave's acoustics. whether by chance, design, or some combination of natural and spiritual forces. The sound took on new dimensions. Multiple chambers resonated together, creating harmonies that seemed to come from the earth itself. In the warrior's chamber, the men felt the vibration through stone. Joseph stood slowly, using his cane, and began a shuffling dance step he hadn't performed since before Korea. Rashid followed, adding movements from Afghan war zone ceremonies meant to honor fallen comrades. Soon all 5 men were moving, each in their tradition's way of acknowledging sacrifice and survival. Their dance wasn't polished or practiced. It was a raw expression of gratitude for life when death had come so close. Thomas watched until he couldn't anymore. Something broke free in him. Not pain this time, but joy so long suppressed it felt. Strange. He joined the dance, incorporating steps his grandfather had taught him, adding what he'd learned watching tribal fighters in Afghanistan move to their own music. Outside, the larger circle felt the energy shift. Children began dancing. In their places, elders nodded approval. Sarah's singing transformed into something more primal, more celebratory. When the final phase, Emerging Reborn, began, the entire cave system rang with sound. Every person present contributed their voice, drum, or instrument. Sarah led them through the transformation song, but this time the entire community powered it, not just her lone voice. As the song built to its culmination, Thomas and the 5 men emerged from the deep chamber. They moved slowly, in single file, each carrying something they'd left behind in that darkness. Thomas held his combat knife, not threateningly, but like the tool it had become, not the weapon it had been. When they reached the main chamber, each man placed his object at the center of the circle. The combat knife joined a bottle of whiskey, a faded photograph, a set of dog tags, and a letter that had never been sent home. These weren't just possessions, they were symbols of what no longer needed to be carried. Henry stood, raising his arms toward the cathedral ceiling of the cavern. We witnessed the transformation of warriors to peacemakers, of survivors to healers, of carriers of weight to teachers of wisdom. The 50 Apache voices responded as one. Ho! As the formal ceremony concluded, the mood lightened, but retained its sacred quality. People shared traditional foods they'd brought. Mesquite flour, cookies, agave candy, prickly pear juice. Children were allowed to run and explore the upper chambers under supervision. Sarah found herself surrounded by people wanting to learn more songs. She taught them simple melodies, but more importantly, shared how these songs had maps hidden within, ways to navigate both physical and emotional landscapes. 2 teenage boys, cousins to Thomas, showed particular interest. We want to come back here, the older one said. Make it a place other kids like us can bring our dads and uncles. Their grandmother, a healer named Rose, overheard. The cave has been waiting for this purpose. My grandmother's grandmother spoke of warrior ceremonies here. During the wars with Mexico, with the cavalry, always caves heal. As afternoon light slanted through cavern openings, creating natural spotlights, the most unexpected moment occurred. Rashid asked if he could share something. From his pack, he pulled out a rubab, a lute-like instrument from Afghanistan. He'd carried it through war, immigration, and his own recovery. In my country, he said, we have a saying, music is the bridge God builds between hearts. May I play for our healing? The hauntingly beautiful melody filled the cavern, notes bending and weaving like prayer. To everyone's amazement, the cave's acoustics transformed the single instrument into an orchestra. Echoes layered upon each other, creating harmonies that seemed impossible from one source. Thomas recognized the melody. Rashid had hummed it sometimes during long watches in Afghanistan. Then it had been a private comfort. Now it became a gift to the community that had welcomed his friend. When Rashid finished, silence held the cave for a long moment. Then Thomas began to sing, hesitantly at first, then stronger. He sang an Apache traveling song, but modified the words, addressing them to Rashid. "Brother who came from far mountains, your music lives in these stones now. Our paths crossed in dust and danger. Now they meet again in peace." The bridge between cultures, between traumas, between healing traditions, had been built with music. As the gathering prepared to leave the cave, Henry asked for one final ritual. Each of the 50 Apache participants touched the cave wall, leaving a blessing for future warriors who might seek healing here. They didn't mark the walls. Apache tradition respects the integrity of sacred spaces, but the intention left an energetic imprint. The procession back to sunlight carried a different energy than the morning descent. People talked quietly, processed what they'd witnessed and experienced. The children, less bound by adult constraints, skipped ahead, already, planning to return. Emerging into late afternoon light, Thomas stood at the canyon rim as others passed through back to the upper world. Sarah waited with him, understanding the significance of this threshold crossing. "You know," he said, watching his people climb. "The trail. For months I wanted to disappear into that cave. Now I realize maybe my spirit needed to dissolve there so something new could form." They were the last two to leave Eagle Canyon that day. As they climbed the final switchback, Thomas paused to look back. The cave entrance was barely visible. From this height, just a shadow among shadows. Yet its presence dominated the landscape now, a gravity well of healing that would draw others to its depths. "Rachel called this morning," Sarah mentioned as they reached the top. "Her cousin, the one in Santa Fe, he's willing to meet you tomorrow. She thinks maybe if someone who's been there talks to him." Thomas nodded slowly. "The ceremony today, it wasn't just about my healing, it was about learning to pass it on." They drove back to Red Springs in comfortable silence, the setting sun painting the desert in golds and purples. As they neared the town, Thomas surprised himself by taking a different route, one that passed the VA office downtown. "I've been getting disability checks," he said, "but I haven't been inside since they diagnosed me. I think I'm ready to start going to group therapy." At the VA parking lot, he didn't get out immediately. They have this peer support program, where veterans further along help guys just coming home. I never thought I could be the one doing the helping. "The best healers are the ones who've broken themselves," Sarah said. As they parted that evening, Thomas made a request that would change everything. The elders want to establish the cave officially as a healing site. They need someone who understands both the traditional knowledge and how to document it properly. They want you to be the keeper. Sarah felt the weight of the offer. Her dissertation research had led her here, but accepting meant abandoning pure academia for something more sacred, more immediate. "I'll need to think about it," she said honestly. "Take the time you need," Thomas replied. "The cave has waited hundreds of years for this purpose. It can wait a little longer for the right keeper." That night, Sarah reviewed her research notes, comparing them to what she'd experienced. The data was fascinating: acoustic measurements, historical context, ethnographic observations. But between the lines lived something her instruments couldn't. Capture the intangible alchemy of place, community and need that created healing. Her phone rang past midnight. Thomas's voice came through, steady but urgent. "Rachel's cousin Michael is in crisis. He tried to hurt himself tonight. They've got him at the hospital, but he's asking for someone who understands. I told them I'd come, but I think if you came too, if you had your drum." 20 minutes later, they met in the hospital parking lot. The psychiatric wing was quiet at this hour, but the air held a weight Sarah recognized. The specific gravity of human suffering contained within walls meant to help. Michael Torres sat in a chair by the window, staring at nothing. He was younger than Thomas, maybe 25, with the same haunted quality Thomas had carried 10 days ago. His hands bore the marks of having punched something solid. Thomas sat down beside him without speaking. Sarah positioned herself where she could see both men, but wasn't intrusive. She began to play her drum softly, not a ceremony, just presence through sound. For 15 minutes, no one spoke. The drum maintained its heartbeat rhythm. Outside, night rain began to fall. Finally, Michael's voice cracked the silence. "They're telling me I have PTSD. They're telling me it gets better. But you—" He looked at Thomas. "You disappeared for months. Maybe that's what I should do." "That's what I did too," Thomas said. 4 months in a cave." He let that sit before continuing. "But after 4 months I was still there, still. In the dark, still fighting the same war every night." Sarah's drum continued its steady pulse. "You know what changed it?" Thomas asked. "Letting someone in. Not all the way, not for a long time, but enough that their voice could reach me. I can't even look at my family," Michael said. "Everything reminds me of Mosul. I see my nephew playing with toy soldiers, and I'm back there." "The cave doesn't have reminders," Thomas said. "That's why I went there. Maybe that's what you need first. Space from all the triggers, but not alone, not without a thread connecting you to the world you want to return to." Sarah's drum shifted to a different rhythm, the night song she'd played in the cave when she didn't know she had an audience. Michael's breathing began to match the beat unconsciously. "I'd take you there," Thomas offered. "But first, let me take you somewhere else. Tomorrow, we're driving to Santa Fe to see a guy who's about where I was 2 weeks ago. Maybe seeing someone else struggle would help. Maybe helping someone else would help you." Michael looked at him directly for the first time. "You'd do that? I mean, you don't even know me." "I know what you're carrying," Thomas said simply, "and I know 50 Apache people witnessed today that the carrying can get lighter." The nurse came to check on Michael then, surprised to find him alert and engaging. After she left, Sarah offered to teach him one simple song, something he could use to ground himself when the world became too much. As they left the hospital, rain still falling, Michael had agreed to meet them the next day. Thomas turned to Sarah in the parking lot. "You're coming tomorrow to Santa Fe?" "I am," she confirmed. "I've been thinking about what Henry asked, about being the keeper of the cave. I think my research can continue there, just in a different form." They stood in the rain for a moment, watching drops create small rivers on the windshield. "You know what's different about tonight?" Thomas asked. 2 weeks ago, if someone had told me I'd be talking another veteran out of a dark place, I'd have laughed. I couldn't even talk myself out of mine. "The difference," Sarah said, "is that you're not alone in it anymore." The drive to Santa Fe the next day started at dawn. Michael rode in the back seat, quiet but present. Sarah had brought 3 drums. This time, having learned that giving someone something to do with their hands helped them talk. The veteran they were visiting, Kevin Torres, no relation to Michael, lived in a converted mining office outside the city. His brother had arranged the meeting, hoping that seeing someone who'd emerged from similar darkness might reach where family couldn't. When they arrived, Kevin appeared at the door, unshaven, clearly startled by visitors. But when he saw Thomas, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Solidarity. "I hear you served with the 82nd Airborne," Thomas said, extending his hand instead of offering the clinical professional courtesy he'd expected. The next hour unfolded like layers of trust being peeled away. Kevin showed them around his space, how he'd secured every window, how he slept in a corner where he could see all entrances, how he'd stopped answering his phone because civilian priorities felt alien. Sarah suggested they sit outside where the sun could reach them. She'd learned in the cave that darkness had its place in healing, but so did light. As they sat on rough wooden steps, she introduced the drums. "These don't have triggers," she explained. "They're not like anything you heard over there. They're older than the wars we're fighting now." Michael spoke up, surprising everyone. "I can't listen to fireworks anymore. 4th of July sounds too much like Mosul, but this feels different. They began simply playing rhythms with no pattern required. Kevin's hands shook at first, then steadied. The physical act of creating sound seemed to anchor him to this moment, this place, away from flashbacks. "You know what I miss?" Kevin said after a while. "Being part of a team, having a mission. Here I'm just a broken vet collecting disability and trying not to scare my family." Thomas set down his drum. "What if I told you there's a mission here, building a healing space for other warriors, making sure what happened to us gets used, to help others?" It was then Thomas fully articulated what had been forming in his mind since the ceremony. The cave could become a sanctuary, but it needed infrastructure, safe access, emergency protocols, connections to mental health services, guides who understood both traditional healing and modern trauma. "The Apache have knowledge," he explained. "Sarah has academic understanding. The community has support. But we need veterans who've walked this path to help others navigate it." By the time they left Santa Fe that afternoon, Kevin had committed to meeting with Henry and the elders. Michael had grown quiet again, but his brother later texted that he'd slept without nightmares for the first time in months. The journey back gave Sarah time to reflect on what was emerging. Not just healing for individuals, but the birth of something larger. An integration of traditional medicine with modern needs, the creation of new ceremonies to address contemporary wounds. When they arrived back in Red Springs, Thomas asked Sarah to stop at Murphy's trading post. The old man behind the counter looked up from his magazine, eyes registering the change in Thomas's demeanor. "Murphy," Thomas said, "you know that old mining office out by Eagle Canyon? The one near where you used to hunt?" "Know it well," Murphy replied cautiously. "We want to buy it, turn it into a veterans center with connections to traditional healers." Murphy studied Thomas for a long moment. "You asking or telling?" "I'm asking for your help," Thomas replied honestly. "You've known this community for decades. We need someone who can bridge this, someone non-Apache who understands Apache ways, someone who can talk to the county about permits and zoning." It was the first time Thomas had asked for help from his broader community since returning. Sarah saw the significance. Another threshold crossed. 2 weeks after the ceremony in the cave, Sarah stood at the same spot where she'd first met Thomas. The cave entrance now hosted a simple wooden structure, not blocking access, but providing basic shelter and information for those who might seek healing here. Inside, posted on the wall alongside traditional Apache pictographs, were guidelines, in both English and Apache. This space welcomes all warriors seeking healing. Traditional ceremonies must be conducted by Apache elders. Visitors must show respect for the sacred nature of this place. Solo retreats require check-in protocols for safety music, and drums are welcome. Modern technology should be minimized. Thomas approached from behind, his footsteps no longer carrying the tense alertness of a man expecting attack. "The county approved our permits," he said. "Murphy came through with 2 zoning board members who served in Vietnam. And Kevin?" Sarah asked. "Moved here last week. He's staying in Murphy's back room, helping renovate the office building. Having something to work on seems to help him." They walked to the cave entrance together. Inside, they could hear drumming. Kevin and Michael had taken to practicing together, creating their own healing rhythms. "You know what my grandfather told me yesterday," Thomas said as they paused at the threshold. "He said this place has been waiting for generations to fulfill its purpose. That our wars might be different from our ancestors, but the need for healing never changes." Sarah pulled out her notebook, now filled with observations that straddled the line between academic record and spiritual journal. "I've been documenting everything. The songs, the ceremonies, the transformation stories. I think I can complete my doctorate while keeping the cave's traditions alive." "And after your doctorate?" Thomas asked. "This is my life's work now," she said simply. "Teaching others, preserving knowledge, witnessing healing, wherever that leads." As they entered the cave, the drumming grew louder. Other veterans had begun arriving, word spreading through that mysterious network that connects those who've served. Each brought their own darkness, their own hope. The establishment of Eagle Canyon as an official healing site marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of something larger. Within 6 months, representatives from other indigenous healing centers began visiting. A Navajo medicine man came from Arizona, a Lakota spiritual leader from South Dakota. Each brought their own traditions for working with returning warriors, and cross-cultural learning began. The Apache community provided mentorship in ceremony while learning from others' approaches. Sarah found herself documenting not just healing, songs, but the emergence of new rituals that address specifically modern warfare's impact on ancient souls. Thomas became a bridge between worlds, veteran to veteran, Apache to outsider, traditional healer to modern therapist. He completed his own therapy at the VA while also learning directly from the medicine people. His grandfather taught him ceremonial protocols. His university training couldn't. 6 months after that transformative ceremony, another gathering took place in the cave. This time 100 people came, not just to witness healing, but to establish a charter for the Eagle Canyon Warrior Medicine Society. Thomas was named as the first veteran liaison, Sarah as cultural preservation director. That evening, as the expanded community celebrated outside the cave, Sarah found Thomas sitting at the edge of the canyon. The stars were brilliant overhead, undiminished by light pollution out here. "My mother asked me something yesterday," he said. "She wanted to know when I felt like I'd come home from war." "What did you tell her?" "I told her it wasn't a when. It was a who and a where, and a song that finally reached me." In the distance, drums continued their eternal rhythm, some traditional, some new, all speaking the universal language of healing. The path forward wasn't about leaving the past behind, but about transforming it into wisdom that could light the way for others lost in their own darkness. The ceremony of 50 Apache had been a beginning, not an end. From that foundation grew something no one had expected, a living bridge between ancient healing and contemporary pain, between individual transformation and community strength, between the songs of the past and the hope of the future. And somewhere, in those caverns where darkness had once seemed absolute, new songs were being born, songs that would reach other warriors, in other caves, in other times yet to come. A year after the first gathering, Sarah stood at the entrance of the newly constructed Eagle Canyon Healing Lodge. The building, designed by Thomas in consultation with tribal architects, blended seamlessly into the landscape. Earth-toned walls that echoed the canyon's stratigraphy, solar panels that glinted like mica, windows positioned to frame the healing spaces where songs would carry farthest. Inside, 12 veterans from across the Southwest were gathering for the first intensive healing retreat. Thomas had spent months designing a protocol that honored traditional Apache ceremonies while incorporating elements from other indigenous traditions and modern therapeutic approaches. Each participant had committed to a 7-day journey that would culminate in their own emergence ceremony in the cave. Among the 12 was a woman named Jennifer Chen, a Navy helicopter pilot who'd completed 3 tours over Iraq. She'd been the first to challenge whether the program would work for female veterans, for Asian Americans, for those whose war wounds weren't visible on their bodies but carved labyrinths through their minds. "My nightmares come in the sound of rotas," she told Thomas during intake. "I saved lives, but I also took them. The machine gun I manned. How does music help with that?" Thomas didn't have easy answers. Instead, he introduced her to Emily One Horse, a female Apache Warrior Society member who'd been invited to help adapt ceremonies for women veterans. Emily's grandmother had been a code talker's wife, keeping the home fires burning while her husband carried secrets that couldn't be spoken even after the war ended. "We know about carrying secrets," Emily said. We know about fighting from the sky. Apache women rode with warriors, defended villages when men were away. Your war is different, but the weight you carry has the same shape as ancient burdens. The retreat began with purification ceremonies at dawn. Unlike the large gathering that had witnessed Thomas's healing, this was intimate. Each veteran received personal attention, songs tailored to their specific trauma. Sarah conducted acoustic assessments to determine which chambers would resonate best with each person's voice, believing that finding one's true sound was key to unlocking healing. Rashid Ahmed returned as a guest teacher, bringing techniques from Afghan healing traditions. He taught the veterans how to use metal singing bowls, explaining that in Afghanistan, returned warriors would sit with these bowls for hours, letting the vibrations reorganize their internal rhythms. In my country, we say trauma lives in the body like discord in a string, Rashid demonstrated, striking a bowl. Healing is finding the right tone to bring harmony back. During these first sessions, unexpected connections emerged. Marcus, the Vietnam veteran who'd attended Thomas's ceremony, shared a breakthrough. For 50 years, I thought I needed to forget the war to heal. But your songs taught me to remember differently, to honor the buddies I lost without being trapped in how I lost them. Jennifer found herself drawn to Marcus's wisdom. Though their wars were decades apart, she recognized the same struggle in his eyes. When they drummed together, their rhythms naturally complemented each other, age and experience creating a musical dialogue across generations. By the third day, the group had developed its own chemistry. The desert isolation that might have felt suffocating to some veterans actually felt protective, allowing them to lower defenses built up over years of hypervigilance. The absence of traffic sounds, of crowds, of anything that could trigger memories, of combat zones created a vacuum where new patterns could emerge. That evening, something unprecedented happened. The 12 veterans asked Henry if they could perform a concert, not for an audience, but for the desert itself. They had spent days learning how to harmonize traditional Apache songs with their own musical backgrounds. A former Marine had brought his saxophone, and a wounded army corporal had started playing the flute again, for the first time since his injury. As the sun set, they assembled at Painter's Bluff. The music they created defied categorization, jazz improvisation woven through, Apache chants, classical flute phrases answering warrior songs, rhythms that belonged to no single tradition, but to the shared experience of return from conflict. The desert wind carried their music across miles of open space. Ranchers claimed they heard strange harmonies that night. Wildlife behaved oddly, as if drawn to this new sound in their ancient landscape. Whether supernatural or not, something had shifted in the relationship between these warriors and the land. During the fourth day's session in the cave, Jennifer experienced her breakthrough. The group was practicing the warrior's release ceremony, designed to help veterans separate their military identity from their essential self, to honor what they'd been while not being trapped in that single role forever. As Jennifer sang her verse solo in Apache, words meaning, "I have flown in service, now I walk in peace," her voice caught on something deeper than memory. The cave's perfect acoustics amplified not just sound, but emotion, and suddenly she was back in her Chinook, the weight of the door gun in her hands, the sight of tracer fire below. But this time, instead of the usual panic, she let the memory move through her like music. She sang through the fear, transforming it into notes that bounced off ancient walls. The other veterans drummed steadily, giving her a rhythmic foundation as she navigated this inner landscape. When she finished, tears streamed down her face, but her breathing was steady. "I was so afraid of breaking down," she said. "I've held it together for so long. But this feels like breaking open, not breaking down. This moment became the template for the retreat's methodology. Creating safe spaces for controlled decompression became central to the program. By the 5th day, veterans who hadn't cried since childhood were accessing deep wells of grief, anger, and finally, relief. The breakthrough continued during personal retreat time. Each veteran spent half a day alone in their chosen chamber, with emergency protocols in place but otherwise undisturbed. During her solo time, Jennifer discovered a small inner chamber Sarah's explorations had missed, a space that resonated perfectly with her alto range. She sang her battalion's call signs, the names of crew members lost, apologies and gratitudes she'd never voiced. Meanwhile, outside the cave system, the broader Eagle Canyon initiative was taking shape. Murphy had converted his trading post into a virtual command center, fielding calls from veterans nationwide who'd heard about the program. Dave Johnson had donated land for transitional housing, tiny homes where veterans could live affordably. While participating in extended healing protocols, the community support system expanded organically. Local businesses offered reduced rates for veterans. A retired teacher started basic literacy classes for those whose combat deployments had interrupted their education. A group of Vietnam veterans began a mentorship program explaining to younger warriors that healing wasn't linear, that setbacks didn't mean failure, just part of the journey. During the 6th day, the retreat faced its first major crisis. Daniel Martinez, an Army Ranger who'd been progressing well, triggered severely during a group session. A backfiring truck on the distant highway cut through the canyon's acoustic anomaly and reached the cave like automatic weapons fire. Daniel dropped to combat position instantly, hyperventilating, convinced they were under attack. Rather than trying to calm him through conventional means, Thomas improvised. He began drumming an emergency grounding rhythm, something not in any traditional playbook, but inspired by Daniel's specific training. The beat matched the tactical breathing exercises military psychologists taught. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. Sarah joined with voice, creating a sonic version of battlefield command structure. Her words were simple, direct. Ranger Daniel, this is Sarah Mitchell. We have the perimeter. All sectors are clear. No engagement required. Stand easy. Other veterans recognized the format, the precise way information was delivered in combat. Zones. They joined in, each taking a sector, reporting all clear in the military phonetic alphabet. Within minutes, they'd recreated a familiar safety protocol, using only voice and drum. As Daniel's breathing normalized, he laughed shakily. That was the most tactical breathing exercise I've ever done. The incident revealed something crucial. Healing didn't mean abandoning military training or identity. Instead, it meant integrating those skills into civilian life in healthy ways. The group spent the rest of the day exploring how their combat disciplines could become tools for community service rather than triggers for anxiety. On the final day, the emergence ceremony drew not 50 Apache witnesses, but a community of 200 people, veterans, families, local supporters, and representatives from other indigenous healing initiatives. The 12 participants had transformed visibly. They stood straighter, made eye contact more readily, smiled without the shadows that had haunted their faces a week earlier. The ceremony began with each veteran gifting something to the cave, objects they'd carried since war that no longer served them. Jennifer left the compass she'd used to navigate rescue missions, keeping the memories but releasing the hypervigilance that made her check her position constantly, even in her own home. Henry explained each offering significance to the gathered witnesses. These weren't just personal items, they were energetic anchors being transmuted from weights into blessings for future healing seekers. As the 12 emerged from the cave in single file, a subtle but profound change occurred in Red Springs and the surrounding area. The success of this first intensive retreat had catalyzed something larger than anyone had anticipated. Veterans who'd been isolated for years began emerging from their own private caves, the spare bedrooms, the workshops, the hunting blinds, where they'd hidden from human contact. The Eagle Canyon Initiative quickly overwhelmed its original framework. Within months, Thomas and Sarah were fielding requests for training from other indigenous communities wanting to establish similar programs. A Cherokee medicine man drove from Oklahoma. A Pueblo elder arrived from New Mexico. Each brought their own traditions while learning how Eagle Canyon had adapted ancient wisdom to contemporary needs. The academic world began taking notice. Sarah received invitations to speak at conferences where she presented papers with titles like Acoustic Healing, Traditional Music as PTSD Intervention, and Sacred Spaces as Therapeutic Environments for Combat Veterans. Her research methodology, combining quantitative data collection with qualitative spiritual experience, pushed boundaries in multiple disciplines. But she never forgot that behind every data point was a human story. She kept a private journal of these stories, ensuring that statistics never overshadowed the actual healing journeys. Meanwhile, Thomas developed into an unexpected leader. The young warrior who'd once lived in darkness now coordinated a complex network of healers, therapists, veterans advocates, and traditional medicine carriers. He spoke at VA hospitals, tribal councils, and congressional committees about the urgent need for culturally integrated healing approaches. His testimony before a Senate subcommittee on Veterans Affairs brought tears to hardened politicians. Senators, I served my country in Afghanistan. When I came home, my country gave me medical care, disability benefits, and talk therapy. But I didn't fully come home until 50 Apache people witnessed my healing in a sacred cave. We cannot ask young Americans to fight for our diverse nation, while offering them only a single tradition of healing upon their return. The summer brought unexpected developments. The Department of Defense contacted the Eagle Canyon Initiative about creating a pilot program for active duty personnel rotating home from deployments. Could preventive healing protocols reduce PTSD development? Could traditional ceremonies help service members process trauma before it calcifies into disorder? Thomas approached this opportunity with both excitement and caution. He consulted with elders, veterans, and even Rashid, whose experience bridging cultures proved invaluable. They developed a shortened protocol, 3 days instead of 7, that service members could complete during their post-deployment leave. The first military pilot included 20 Marines from Camp Pendleton. Their commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Walsh, accompanied them, having read about the program in a military psychology journal. She was skeptical, but committed to exploring any approach that might help her Marines transition. I've lost more Marines to suicide stateside than to enemy fire overseas, she confided to Thomas. If your songs and drums can reach places our debrief protocols can't, I'll drum with them myself. True to her word, Colonel Walsh participated fully in the ceremonies. She brought leadership to the healing circle, asking rigorous questions about methodology while respecting cultural boundaries. The Marines, seeing their commanding officer engage authentically with Apache traditions, opened themselves to possibilities they might have otherwise dismissed. On the third day, during a group processing session, Sergeant Mike O'Neill shared something that crystallized the program's potential. Last deployment, I carried men I couldn't save. It's been eating at me, wondering if I could have done something different, faster, better. In the cave yesterday, singing about warriors honoring the fallen, I finally understood. I didn't fail them. I honored them by trying. The Apache have words for carrying memory without carrying blame. We don't have those words in English. This linguistic and conceptual gap between military culture, therapeutic language, and ancient wisdom became a focus of Sarah's continuing research. She began documenting how Apache terms for different types of courage, loss, and healing provided frameworks that English lacked, especially regarding warrior experiences. As autumn approaches, the Eagle Canyon Initiative faces its most significant challenge yet. The local media had picked up the story, and soon national outlets followed. While publicity brought resources and recognition, it also attracted the wrong kind of attention. A group calling themselves Tradition Keepers accused the program of exploiting Apache sacred practices for public funding. Some members were Apache themselves, concerned about cultural appropriation and the commercialization of healing ceremonies. The controversy forced the community to confront difficult questions. How could they share healing while preserving sacred boundaries? Where was the line between appropriation and appreciation? How could they ensure that growth didn't compromise integrity? Henry called for a tribal council, inviting both supporters and critics. The meeting, held under the harvest moon, drew over 300 people. Voices from every generation spoke. Some defended the program as an essential evolution of tradition. Others feared that mainstream success would inevitably dilute pure Apache practice. Thomas found himself in the unexpected position of defending both tradition and innovation. He spoke in Apache first, then in English. My great-great-grandfathers. Medicine wasn't exactly like his father's. The enemies had changed, the wounds had changed. Medicine evolves to meet need while maintaining its heart. Yes, we must protect what is sacred, but we must also answer the cry of warriors who need healing now. The debate continued for hours. Sarah presented her research, demonstrating how the program preserved traditional protocols while adapting delivery methods. Veterans shared testimonies about how Apache wisdom had saved their lives, but critics raised valid concerns about boundary dissolution. The resolution came from an unexpected source. Emma Two Rivers, 93 years old and one of the last native Apache speakers in the area, stood slowly. The crowd fell silent immediately. I have seen many changes, she began in Apache, her granddaughter translating. I remember when our ceremonies were forbidden by law. I remember when our children were forbidden to speak our language. I remember when a boy named Henry Blackfeather first learned the old ways after they were nearly lost. She gestured to Henry, who bowed his head respectfully. Now I see Apache wisdom helping heal those who defended our freedom to practice our ways. This is not appropriation. This is reciprocity. But, she raised a finger, we must watch carefully. Sacred things can be damaged by careless handling. We need protocols, not prohibition. Her words carried weight that ended the formal opposition. The community agreed to establish a Sacred Practices Council, elders and medicine people who would oversee any expansion of the program, ensuring that core ceremonies remained protected while allowing therapeutic applications to evolve. This governance structure became a model for other indigenous healing initiatives. Within a year, the Eagle Canyon Protocol, as it was officially named, was being adapted by 12 different tribal programs across North America. Each maintained their unique cultural elements while sharing the fundamental approach, integrating traditional wisdom with contemporary needs. The winter months brought a different kind of transformation. As temperatures dropped, the cave system's acoustics changed subtly. Sarah discovered that certain chambers, warmer than others due to geothermal activity, created unique resonant conditions ideal for specific types of healing. The Winter Retreat program emerged from this discovery. Veterans dealing with cold-related combat trauma, those who'd served in Afghanistan's mountains, or Alaska's frozen training grounds, found particular comfort in the geothermally warmed chambers. The steady earth heat became a metaphor for the persistent warmth of healing that doesn't fade even when surface conditions grow harsh. Jennifer Chen returned for the winter program, not as a participant, but as an emerging healer herself. She'd spent months integrating her experience, learning from Emily One Horse how to adapt the warriors' return ceremonies for women veterans' specific needs. During one winter session, she guided a group of female service members through a modified version of the transformation song. The women had added verses about returning to bodies that carried different types of war wounds, military sexual trauma, the invisible injuries that traditional warrior ceremonies hadn't specifically addressed, Aziki. Their voices rose in the warm chamber. Jennifer felt the full circle of her journey. The woman who'd questioned whether ancient songs could heal modern wounds now led others in creating new verses that honored all forms of service and sacrifice. Meanwhile, Rashid had established a program connecting Afghan refugees with veteran healers. His unique perspective, as someone who'd both suffered under war and helped wage it, created bridges of understanding that formal conflict resolution couldn't reach. "In Afghanistan, I learned American military songs," he shared during one session. "Now, in America, I teach Afghan peace songs. War makes strange teachers. Healing makes stranger students." His innovation involved creating translation ceremonies, rituals, where veterans and refugees jointly learned each other's healing traditions. The process helped both groups process guilt, loss, and the complex emotions of cross-cultural conflict participation. One particularly powerful session involved Thomas and an Afghan interpreter named Fadil, who'd worked with Thomas's unit. Fadil carried guilt about providing information that led to airstrikes killing civilians. Thomas carried guilt about survivors of strikes that should have killed him instead. Together, they sang songs of forgiveness in both Apache and Pashto, creating melodies that neither language alone could achieve. As the winter solstice approached, the Eagle Canyon Initiative prepared for its first anniversary ceremony. The event would both celebrate achievements and initiate new developments. Thomas had been working with tribal architects to design a proper healing center, a structure that could accommodate the growing program while maintaining connection to the land. The solstice gathering drew representatives from 36 tribal nations, the Department of Defense, the VA, and international observers from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, countries with both indigenous populations and military veterans needing similar healing approaches. Under the longest night stars, Henry led a ceremony recognizing the full circle of healing that had emerged from Eagle Canyon. He acknowledged Thomas first, then Sarah, then every person whose transformation had contributed to the greater pattern. "A year ago, one warrior found his way out of darkness through ancient songs," Henry said. "Today, we have witnessed how one healing can become thousands, how one cave can become a living tradition, how the weight warriors carry can transform into strength they share." As Henry spoke, Sarah noticed something remarkable happening with the acoustics. The cold night air, combined with the specific arrangement of bodies around the ceremonial fire, created acoustic conditions that seemed to amplify and harmonize all sounds naturally. Whispers from the back reached the front clearly. When people shifted positions, their movements sounded musical. She realized the landscape itself was participating in the ceremony, not through supernatural means, but through the same natural, acoustic principles that had drawn Apache people to this site for generations. The land had always been teaching. Humans had simply learned to listen again. The celebration continued through the night. Veterans shared stories of healing. Elders, blessed expansions of the program. Children performed traditional dances they'd learned alongside innovation. Sarah presented research findings that would be published in multiple journals, bridging academic credibility with spiritual authenticity. But the most significant moment came just before dawn. Thomas stood before the community, no longer the Broken warrior who'd emerged from darkness a year ago, but not yet whatever he was becoming. He carried both identities with grace. "We've built something that honors our ancestors while meeting our needs," he said. "We've proven that traditional medicine works alongside modern therapy. We've shown that warriors can heal while remaining warriors, but this is only the beginning." He outlined plans for the next phase, a mobile version of the healing protocols that could reach veterans in urban areas, a training program for non-indigenous therapists to understand and integrate traditional approaches, and partnerships with universities to study the neurological effects of ceremonial healing. As the sun rose on the anniversary morning, painting the canyon walls in shades of hope, Sarah added a final entry to her year's journal. What began as academic research became a spiritual journey. What started as one man's healing grew into a community's awakening. The songs I came to study taught me to sing. The traditions I came to document invited me to participate. The veteran I came to help became my teacher. In Eagle Canyon, I found an answer to a question I didn't know I was asking. How does an ancient people's wisdom remain alive? Through adaptation that honors essence, through sharing that deepens rather than dilutes, through healing that strengthens the healers as much as the healed. The cave has kept its own counsel for generations. Now it speaks through us, Apache, refugee, veteran, academic, child, elder. Its acoustic secrets have become our healing songs. Its darkness has birthed our light. One warrior's journey home became a pathway for thousands. One woman's songs became a community's voice. 50 Apache witnesses started a movement that ripples outward still. And in the resonance of this canyon, where sound bends and multiplies and transforms, we learned that healing, like music, creates harmonies only when different notes agree to play together. The ceremony of 50 was not an ending. It was an invitation to every lost soul to find their way home, through songs older than memory, but newer than each breath they take to sing them. As she closed the journal, Sarah heard drums beginning, the steady heartbeat that would accompany the days, celebrations, and the night's emergent futures. Somewhere, another veteran was probably waking up to their first morning without nightmares. Somewhere, a cave waited to welcome them home. The 50 Apache had witnessed Thomas's transformation. Now, thousands stood ready to witness whatever came. Next, healing multiplied through sharing, tradition strengthened through evolution, darkness transformed perpetually into light through the simple act of raising voice in hope. In the end, Sarah's songs had never just been about bringing one warrior back from the edge. They had been about calling forth an entire community's capacity for healing, and the echo of Eagle Canyon still carried that call, reaching into every shadow where warriors waited for their own verses in the endless song of return. 2 years after the first ceremony, Eagle Canyon faced its ultimate test. A young Apache soldier named Carlos Begay had been killed in action in Syria. His body came home, but his spirit, according to the medicine people, remained caught between worlds, trapped in the violence of his final moments. His platoon brothers escorted his remains back to the reservation. Among them was Private Jason Walsh, Carlos's best friend since basic training. Jason carried visible scars from the same IED that killed Carlos, but his deepest wounds came from the guilt of survival. "We should have swept that road differently," Jason told Thomas during the funeral wake. "I kept telling him to check the shoulder. If he'd just listened to me." His voice fractured. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see him step forward. I see the flash. I hear—" Thomas recognized a darkness deeper than his own had been. When the living carry the weight of the dead, healing becomes more complex. That night, he consulted with Henry about an ancient ceremony rarely performed, the Ghost Walk, designed to help a warrior's spirit complete its journey from the battlefield to the spirit world. The ghost walk requires 50 Apache to stand as witnesses, Henry explained. They form a bridge of living energy, allowing the fallen warrior's spirit to cross from the place of death to the place of ancestors. But there was a complication. The ceremony also demanded that someone who fought beside the fallen must walk the path first, reliving the death, accepting it, and then guiding the spirit home. Jason would need to descend into his trauma more deeply than any healing journey previously attempted. Sarah had expanded her understanding of acoustic healing beyond anything conventional science recognized. She discovered that certain combinations of voices could create harmonic fields that seemed to affect brainwave patterns measurably. The cave's unique geology amplified these effects exponentially. For Jason's journey, we'll need more than songs, she told the gathering of elders and medicine people. We'll need to recreate the sonic landscape of his trauma, the artillery sounds, the explosion, the aftermath, but transmuted through traditional harmonies. We'll need to transform his nightmares into a healing dreamscape. The preparation took a week. Veterans who'd served in Syria helped Sarah create accurate sound reconstructions using drums and voice manipulation. Apache singers learned to weave protective songs around these harsh sounds. The goal was to let Jason experience his trauma in a spiritually protected environment where he could finally process what his mind had been rejecting. On the day of the ceremony, Jason's hands shook as he approached the cave. His parents had flown in from Kansas. Carlos's family stood solemn and grief-stricken. The 50 Apache witnesses included warriors from different generations: Korea, Vietnam, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan. Each understood the weight of carrying fallen brothers. Thomas walked beside Jason into the cave's entrance. "I'm going with you," he said simply. "You won't walk this path alone." The first chamber served as preparation space. Singers from neighboring pueblos had joined the Apache, creating a soundscape of protection. As their voices layered and harmonized, the cave walls seemed to pulse with ancient understanding. Jason was given ceremonial paint, symbols of protection and transformation. He carried Carlos's purple heart and a photo from their graduation. From airborne school, these objects would serve as focus points during his journey. Sarah had positioned her recording equipment strategically. This wasn't for academic documentation, but for therapeutic mapping. If they could record the acoustic signature of Jason's healing, they might develop protocols for helping other battle buddies process survivors' guilt. The first phase will recreate his last day with Carlos, Thomas explained. The singers will create the sounds of their mourning, voices in Arabic, helicopter rotors, radio chatter. You'll need to remember, but in sacred space. As the ceremony began, the cave transformed. Voices imitating distant calls to prayer mixed with native flute sounds, suggesting helicopter blades. Drums created the rhythm of military convoys. The acoustic complexity challenged conventional understanding. How could human voices alone create such dimensional sound? Jason closed his eyes. His breathing quickened as he returned to that morning. "We were laughing," he said. "Carlos was teaching me Spanish curse words. Said I couldn't deploy with his family without knowing how to insult his sisters properly." The singers adjusted their tones, bringing warmth to the austere military sounds. Children's voices added playful elements, capturing the camaraderie Jason described. But as the timeline approached the moment of death, Jason's eyes flew open. "I can't," he said. "I can't go there." Thomas gripped his shoulder. "You're not there. You're here. We've built a bridge. You can walk across that moment instead of falling into it." Sarah cued the transition. The harsh sounds began to dim as Apache protective songs grew stronger. The explosion was represented not as violent noise, but as a sudden silence, negative space where sound should be. This artistic choice proved crucial. Instead of triggering panic, it captured the moment. as absence, allowing processing without overwhelming. In the silence, Jason began to speak of that day differently. He saw the wire first. He was reaching back to push me away. His last act was protective. This realization that Carlos had died saving him transformed Jason's guilt into a different kind of grief, still painful, but not poisoned by self-blame. The second phase involved walking Carlos's spirit path. Ancient Apache chants guided the transition. The 50 witnesses in the outer chamber sang the journey beyond songs, creating a sonic corridor for spirit passage. Their voices weren't just sound, they were active prayer, each song another step of the bridge Carlos' spirit could cross. In the inner chamber, something extraordinary occurred. Jason, still in ceremonial trance, began describing visions. He saw Carlos's spirit, still in desert camouflage, looking confused but peaceful. Following impulses he didn't understand, Jason began speaking to his friend in a mixture of English and Apache phrases he'd learned during his healing. He told Carlos about the family waiting to receive him properly, about the scholarship fund established in his name at their old high school, about the traditional tattoo his entire platoon had gotten, a design combining the Apache symbol for warrior with their unit insignia. As Jason spoke, describing each detail of honor being paid to Carlos's memory, the temperature in the cave subtly shifted. Acousticians would later analyze this moment extensively, finding unexplained resonances that suggested physical phenomena beyond purely auditory experience. The final phase required Jason to release Carlos to the ancestral realm while accepting his own survival. This proved the most difficult part. Survivor's guilt doesn't surrender easily, even in sacred space. For hours, Jason wrestled with permission to live while his friend had died. The breakthrough came through an unexpected source. Private Eleanor Begay, Carlos's 6-year-old niece, was among the witnesses. Without prompting, she began singing a child's lullaby. Not Apache, but a song her grandfather had created, mixing Apache words with English to help her sleep when afraid. Her pure and clear voice cut through the ceremonial complexity. The lullaby spoke of warriors becoming stars, watching over those they loved from above. As she sang, Jason wept openly for the first time since Carlos's death. When he emerged from the cave hours later, dawn was breaking. He moved differently. Not with the guilty heaviness he'd carried for months, but with the purposeful step of someone who'd made peace with an unbearable truth. The ceremony's ripple effects extended far beyond individual healing. Word spread through military networks about the Apache ritual that helped survivors process battlefield loss. The Department of Defense, initially skeptical of indigenous healing methods, found itself fielding inquiries from Gold Star families, those who'd lost service members to combat. Colonel Walsh, who'd maintained contact since the first military pilot program, proposed an unprecedented initiative. Could the Ghost Walk protocols be adapted for families visiting battlefield sites? Many military families felt compelled to visit where their loved ones died, seeking closure but often returning more traumatized. Working with Sarah and the Apache Medicine Council, they developed the Battlefield Reconciliation Project. Small groups of Apache singers would accompany Gold Star families to overseas locations, using modified ceremonial songs to help family members process the landscape of loss without being overwhelmed by it. The first expedition took Eleanor Begay's family to Syria, under strict military escort and with cooperation from local religious authorities. A traditional Apache ceremony helped Carlos's parents say goodbye at the site of his death. The experience proved so powerful that it attracted attention from mental health professionals across the globe. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a psychiatrist specializing in combat trauma, began studying the neurological effects of these ceremonies. Her preliminary findings suggested that certain combinations of repetitive sound, sacred context, and community support created measurable changes in amygdala activation, the brain region associated with fear memory processing. Traditional healers have been treating PTSD for thousands of years, Dr. Martinez published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. We're just now developing tools sensitive enough to measure what indigenous communities have always known, that healing requires more than individual therapy. It needs ritual, community, and connection to something larger than self. Her research attracted funding from the National Institute of Mental Health. Soon, Eagle Canyon became a satellite site for cutting-edge trauma research that validated ancient wisdom through modern scientific metrics. But the true test came when news arrived of a new conflict brewing in the Middle East. For the first time since Eagle Canyon's expansion, they faced the prospect of receiving veterans from wars that were just beginning, rather than those who'd returned years ago. A group of 19-year-old soldiers, fresh from basic training and deployed within months, returned from a skirmish with insurgents in Yemen. They hadn't experienced extended combat, but the intensity of their brief engagement left several struggling with acute stress reactions. Among them was specialist James Whitehorse, Apache himself, but raised in Phoenix, disconnected from tribal traditions. His great-grandmother had attended the same government schools that attempted to erase native identity. His family had spent generations trying to reclaim what was taken. Now, warfare had created another disconnection he needed to bridge. I joined because my ancestors were warriors, James explained to Thomas, but nobody taught me the songs. Nobody prepared me for the reality that modern war isn't about honor. It's about staying alive while completing mission objectives. His confession opened discussions about a growing issue. Young Native Americans enlisting without the traditional frameworks that had supported previous generations of Apache warriors. The military actively recruited on reservations, promising honor and adventure, but discharge sent them home spiritually unprepared for reintegration. Sarah proposed developing a preemptive program, training young Apache considering military service in the traditional warrior protocols that would support them through and after their service. Henry was initially resistant. "We cannot prepare children for war," he insisted, "but we can prepare warriors for peace," Sarah countered. The old songs contained both. They taught how to enter battle with protection and how to return with purification. If we only teach the first part, we send them incomplete. The debate sparked the largest tribal gathering in recent history. Over 3 days, Apache from different bands debated whether traditional warrior training could address modern warfare's complexities. Some argued that current conflicts bore no resemblance to historical Apache warfare, no honor raids, no ceremonial combat, just technological violence at a distance. Others pointed to the successful healing of returned veterans as proof that tradition remained relevant. They noted that the ceremony of 50 had evolved naturally to help warriors cope with contemporary combat experience. The resolution emerged through synthesis rather than sides. They would create a warrior preparation program, not training for war, but training for transition. Young Apache considering military service would learn the songs, stories, and spiritual foundations that would support them through whatever they faced. Crucially, they would also learn the return ceremonies before they left, understanding that homecoming was as important as departure. James Whitehorse became the first participant in this new initiative. Though he'd already served, his experience helped shape the curriculum. He worked with elders to identify which traditional teachings translated to combat situations, which protective songs worked in Kevlar instead of buckskin, which purification rituals could be adapted to military requirements. His insights proved remarkable. the traditional teaching about maintaining harmony with one's weapons needed subtle adjustment. Apache warriors had considered their bows extensions of themselves, requiring spiritual care. Modern warriors needed to understand their rifles similarly, as tools requiring respect rather than objects generating guilt. During one training session, James demonstrated how the traditional night song could be hummed subvocally during guard duty. The melody, passed down for generations to help warriors stay alert while remaining calm, worked as well in Yemen's darkness as it had in Apache mountain passes. His most significant contribution addressed something unprecedented in traditional warfare, the moral injury of causing civilian casualties. Apache warfare had specific protocols for avoiding non-combatant deaths. Modern warfare's complexity often made such precision impossible. Working with Sarah, James helped develop what they called burden songs, musical frameworks for processing moral injury without self-destruction. These songs acknowledged the weight of taking life while affirming the warrior's humanity. They provided a path between the extremes of hardening the heart to survive and drowning in guilt afterward. 3 years after the first ceremony, Eagle Canyon hosted an international gathering of indigenous healing practitioners. Representatives from Maori warriors returning from Afghanistan, First Nations veterans from Iraq, and Australian Aboriginal service members compared notes on traditional healing approaches to combat trauma. The gathering produced unexpected innovations. A Maori healer named Hinewehi demonstrated the haka, traditionally a war dance, adapted for homecoming. The powerful movements allowed warriors to physically process combat energy, transforming it from internalized stress to released strength. The Aboriginal delegations shared Dreamtime stories that helped veterans contextualize their service within ancient cosmic narratives. These stories suggested that warrior spirits chose their paths through multiple lifetimes, making sense of why some souls gravitated toward military service despite childhood pacifism. During the cultural exchange, an incident occurred that would reshape Eagle Canyon's healing approaches. Young veterans from different indigenous backgrounds attempted to drum together, but found their rhythms clashing rather than harmonizing. The sounds seemed to recreate conflict rather than resolve it. Sarah recognized the acoustic challenge immediately. Each culture's healing rhythms carried specific frequencies optimized for their traditional instruments and environments. The cave's acoustics, perfect for Apache songs, created dissonance with some other traditions. The solution emerged through mathematical music theory. Sarah and a visiting acoustician mapped the harmonic relationships between different indigenous healing traditions. They discovered that while the rhythms differed, the underlying mathematical proportions, the spacing between beats, the duration of phrases, often aligned with universal patterns. By teaching a bridge rhythm, a neutral pattern that could translate between traditions, the gather created something revolutionary. For the first time, warriors from different indigenous backgrounds could drum together in a shared healing ceremony without losing their distinct cultural identities. This breakthrough led to the development of the Unity Protocol, using native traditions to integrate veterans through YES. The acronym seemed forced, but the concept was profound. Veterans could receive healing that honored their specific cultural background while benefiting from the wisdom of other traditions. The protocol's first major test came when a group of Iraq veterans from multiple backgrounds requested healing together. Among them were 2 soldiers whose actions during the same battle had put them psychologically at odds, one Apache, one Cherokee. The Apache warrior had called in airstrikes that the Cherokee forward observer had reluctantly spotting for, resulting in civilian casualties. Both men carried differently. Using the Unity Protocol, they found common ground in shared traditional understanding of warrior burden while maintaining their distinct cultural approaches to processing guilt. The ceremony took place simultaneously in the cave and on Cherokee land, with singers in both locations creating sonic bridges across the distance. The healing required both men to honor what the other had done. The difficult decisions made under fire, the humanity maintained in impossible circumstances. They emerged not as war buddies, but as warrior brothers, understanding their conflict not as personal failure, but as the inevitable clash of conscience in modern warfare. As Eagle Canyon approached its 3rd anniversary, the initiative faced a crisis of success. Demand for healing protocols overwhelmed resources. Veterans from across America requested admission to the intensive retreat program, but the cave could only accommodate limited numbers while maintaining ceremonial integrity. The solution required expansion beyond physical space. Sarah proposed creating acoustic replicas, spaces that could reproduce the cave's healing properties through careful architectural design. Using advanced acoustic engineering combined with traditional Apache knowledge about sacred geometry, they designed modular healing rooms that could be constructed anywhere. The first prototype was built in an old gymnasium in Flagstaff. Engineers installed curved walls, calculated ceiling heights, and positioned sound-absorbing materials to recreate the cave's resonance patterns. To everyone's amazement, the artificial space captured much of the original's healing potential. Veterans who couldn't travel to Eagle Canyon could now access similar healing acoustics near their homes. But crucial wisdom emerged. The physical space alone wasn't sufficient. Each site needed its own sacred consecration, its own relationship with local land spirits, its own community of participants. This led to the development of the Sacred Space certification program. Apache elders trained other indigenous leaders in recognizing and preparing healing spaces. The process took years, not because the knowledge was simple, but because each location required understanding its unique spiritual and acoustic signature. By the 4th anniversary, 27 certified healing spaces operated across North America. Each maintained core Apache protocols while adapting to local indigenous traditions and geographic requirements. A site in the Smoky Mountains incorporated Cherokee healing springs. One in the Pacific Northwest integrated Navajo sand painting with Columbia River acoustics. The most ambitious expansion came from an unexpected source. The Mescalero Apache Gaming Commission, seeking to invest casino profits in long-term community benefit, proposed funding a healing center network. Their plan would establish permanent facilities near major VA hospitals, ensuring that no warrior in America lived more than a few hours from traditional healing resources. The proposal sparked intense debate within Apache leadership. Using gaming revenue for sacred purposes raised ethical questions. Could money earned through entertainment fund spiritual healing without corruption? Would increased visibility compromise the program's integrity? The debate was resolved when veterans themselves spoke up. They pointed out that many had used casino winnings to pay for therapy sessions insurance didn't cover. One elder observed that Apache had always adapted new resources to serve traditional purposes. Trading posts had sold rifles that protected the people, so why couldn't modern commerce fund healing programs? The Mescalero Gaming Commission partnered with the Department of Veterans Affairs in an unprecedented agreement. Gaming funds would finance construction and initial operations of healing centers, while VA mental health professionals would receive training in traditional approaches. The synergy promised to revolutionize veterans' health care. During the Center Network's planning phase, a new challenge emerged. The success of Apache healing methods attracted non-native veterans seeking access. Many had developed deep respect for indigenous wisdom during deployment alongside native service members. They asked whether the healing could be shared across racial and cultural boundaries. The question prompted soul-searching among Apache healers. Some argued that the ceremonies gained power through blood connection to the culture that created them. Others noted that warriors who'd served alongside Apache had earned honorary kinship through sacrifice and shared protection, a traditional concept of adopted family. The resolution maintained integrity while expanding compassion. Non-native veterans could participate in adapted protocols that honored Apache wisdom without claiming Apache identity. They learned songs of gratitude and healing without stepping into roles reserved for Apache people. The practice became known as warrior courtesy, spiritual hospitality extended to those who'd served alongside indigenous brothers and sisters. Thomas, now recognized as an Apache medicine keeper for his role in bridging traditional healing with contemporary needs, spoke at the dedication of the first major healing center outside Apache territory. We share these songs, not because they belong to everyone, but because healing belongs to everyone. We teach these ways not to make everyone Apache, but to honor that warriors everywhere need homecoming. We offer this medicine with respect for all traditions and with understanding that each culture has its own songs of return. As the Healing Center network expanded, unexpected allies emerged. Christian veterans who'd initially viewed Apache ceremonies with suspicion found parallels with their own prayer traditions. Many realized that their great-grandparents had survived wars through faith practices that shared common elements with indigenous spirituality, communal ritual, sacred song, ceremonial, healing. Interfaith healing services began spontaneously at several centers. Christian, Apache, and occasionally Islamic or Buddhist prayers intermingled in what participants called warrior wisdom circles. The gatherings didn't blend traditions, but allowed parallel practice, each faith group supporting the others. Healing work. A chaplain from Fort Hood wrote in his monthly newsletter, "I came to observe Apache healing so I could better serve native soldiers. I stayed because I witnessed something profound, that all our religions, at their core, speak the same language when addressing the needs of warriors. In these ceremonies, I see Christ's healing work continuing through different songs." The interfaith development reached a milestone when representatives from world religions gathered at Eagle Canyon for the first International Warrior Healing Symposium. The cave hosted speakers who theorized that humanity's earliest religious impulses arose from warriors processing combat trauma. Archaeological evidence suggested that some of the oldest religious sites worldwide had originated as healing spaces. For returning fighters, Sarah presented research connecting acoustic healing properties found in sacred sites from Ireland's Celtic burial mounds to Peru's Chavin temples. Her hypothesis suggested that ancient peoples had discovered optimal acoustic frequencies for processing trauma independently across cultures. The cave at Eagle Canyon represented this universal human knowledge, not just Apache wisdom. During one session, an Islamic scholar noted parallels between Sufi whirling meditation and the circular movements used in Apache healing dances. Both practices, she observed, disrupted normal thought patterns to facilitate deeper consciousness states necessary for processing trauma. The discussion expanded to include Buddhist walking meditation, Christian labyrinth prayers, and indigenous healing dances, all serving similar psychological functions through different cultural forms. The symposium's breakthrough moment came during a practical demonstration. 20 veterans from different faiths and backgrounds participated in what organizers called the Universal Warrior Blessing. Each tradition contributed protective songs and prayers in their original language. The cave's acoustics naturally harmonized the diverse sounds, creating what witnesses described as music beyond human capability. The event forced examination of previous assumptions about cultural appropriation versus appreciation. They discovered that sharing healing knowledge with proper respect and attribution didn't diminish tradition, it strengthened it. Each culture that learned from Apache methods also shared their own wisdom, creating a reciprocal exchange rather than one-sided extraction. 5 years after Thomas had first emerged from the cave, Eagle Canyon hosted the largest gathering in its recorded history. Over 1,000 people, veterans, healers, researchers and supporters, gathered to witness the certification of the 100th healing space in the network. The ceremony included innovations that Thomas and Sarah had never imagined during their first meeting. Holographic displays showed acoustic measurements proving the healing center's effectiveness. Neuroscientists presented brain scan comparisons demonstrating measurable changes in veterans treated through traditional methods. But technology enhancement never overshadowed the sacred core. As sunset painted the canyon walls orange and purple, 50 Apache voices rose in the original Warrior's Return song. Thomas and Sarah now led the ceremony from different positions, he as a medicine keeper, she as an acoustic scholar and tradition keeper. Their transformation had become a template for thousands of others. The ceremony's emotional peak came when Carlos Begue's family presented a tribute to Jason Walsh. Now serving as a counselor for Battle Buddy survivors, Jason had helped over 200 veterans process survivors' guilt. Carlos's 6-year-old niece Elena, now 11, handed him a star blanket she'd spent a year beading. The design depicted an Apache warrior and an Asian American soldier walking side by side into light. That night, around the ceremonial fire, Thomas spoke to the assembled gathering. His words carried the authority of someone who'd walked from darkness into purpose. 5 years ago, this canyon witnessed one man's healing. Tonight, it witnesses a movement. The 50 Apache who formed a bridge. For my return started a current that's carried thousands home. We've learned that healing multiplies when shared with appropriate respect. We've discovered that trauma tears walls between people, but ceremony builds bridges. What surprised us most? The ancient and future aren't opposites. The song's grandfather taught me work alongside brain-scanning technology. The spirit medicines passed down through generations align with neurological healing pathways modern doctors are just discovering. Tradition doesn't resist innovation. When properly honored, it guides innovation back to wisdom. Sarah added her perspective. My research began by asking how acoustic phenomena could affect human consciousness. I've learned that the more profound question is, how does sacred intention transform acoustic space? The cave's geological properties create unique resonance, but the prayers, songs, and ceremonies of countless healing journeys have also reshaped this space energetically. Science can measure that spiritual work has measurable effects. The gathering continued through the night, different healing circles forming and reforming like dancers in a grand choreography. Apache drums kept the foundational rhythm, while other traditions layered harmonies. Veterans taught peaceful locals warrior wisdom. Children absorbed ancient songs they'd one day pass forward. As dawn approached, all participants formed one vast circle, a community of healing that stretched beyond what anyone could have imagined. When Sarah first sang alone in a cave, not knowing a warrior listened from the shadows. They sang the morning gratitude song together, 1,000 voices creating music that flooded the canyon with hope. Henry Blackfeather, now in his 80s but clear in mind and spirit, offered the closing blessing. He spoke in Apache first, then in English. Our grandfathers used to say, a people who abandon their wounded warriors abandon their future. Tonight, we continue proving that people who heal their warriors secure their tomorrow. Let every warrior who struggles remember, this canyon echoes with songs waiting to guide them home. Let every healer understand, your work reverberates beyond individual lives to shape whole communities. Let everyone present carry this truth. Healing is not just personal recovery, but sacred service to all humanity. As the ceremony concluded, the sun topped the canyon rim, illuminating faces that reflected every ethnicity, age, and background imaginable. The Eagle Canyon Initiative had grown beyond its Apache origins without losing its sacred core. Like sound waves bouncing off canyon walls, each healing had amplified into broader patterns of transformation, the final image etched in memory as the gathering dispersed. A young Apache girl teaching war songs to children of different cultures, all laughing as they struggled with pronunciation, but succeeded in capturing spirit. A Vietnam veteran, tears of memory and gratitude on his weathered face, teaching a teenager just returned from deployment how to drum away bad dreams. A scientist and medicine man collaborating over brain scans and sacred bundles, discovering unified descriptions of healing in their different languages. Above it all, the cave entrance stood dark but welcoming, no longer a place of desperate retreat, but a sanctuary of deliberate return. The songs that once called one lost warrior home had become an infinite chorus, reaching through time and space to every battlefield where warriors fought, every hospital where they healed, every home where they struggled to find belonging. What began as Sarah's voice echoing through darkness had become an endless conversation. What started as 50 Apache witnessing one transformation had grown into millions, recognizing that no warrior walks the path of healing alone. The miracle wasn't that 60 Apache people helped one veteran find healing. The miracle was that one veteran's healing proved to 60, to thousands, to the world, that ancient wisdom holds power to answer contemporary pain, that traditions carry the future within them, even as they honor the past. That when humans create healing sounds in sacred spaces, the very land evolves to magnify those songs toward every ear that needs hope. And in Eagle Canyon, where acoustic miracles first drew humans millennia ago, the canyon walls continue keeping perfect record, not just of the echoes they capture, but of the countless hearts they've helped mend, the endless circle of warriors finding their way home through songs older than memory, but fresher than each sunrise that paints hope across the desert sky. 10 years after Sarah Mitchell first entered Eagle Canyon, she stood at the United Nations Indigenous Peoples Conference, addressing delegates from 124 nations. Behind her, a video wall displayed the cave entrance, now designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site for sacred healing. Traditional healing isn't alternative medicine, she declared. It's original medicine, refined through generations of practice, to address humanity's oldest wounds, those carried home from war. In the audience, Thomas Blackfeather sat beside his teenage daughter, who wore the sacred turquoise pendant that had started this entire journey. He'd married Maria Sanchez, a therapist who'd come to study their methods and stayed to build a life. Their daughter Grace exhibited her father's gift for understanding warrior hearts and her mother's skills in clinical psychology. Henry had passed away 2 years prior, but not before seeing his vision fully realized. On his last day, he'd sat outside the Eagle Cave, watching children practice healing songs while their parents worked in the garden that now supplied the healing centers with sacred herbs. "The songs don't belong to us," he'd told Grace. Then, 8 years old, "We belong to the songs. Remember that when your time comes to keep them." The Eagle Canyon Initiative now operated 847 healing centers worldwide. Each maintained the acoustic principles discovered in the original cave while respecting local sacred traditions. In Australia, Aboriginal Dreamtime spaces. In New Zealand, Moriware. In Canada, First Nations medicine wheels, all connected through the wisdom that sound heals when coupled with sacred intention. Sarah's groundbreaking research had revolutionized trauma therapy. Her published works, particularly Resonance of Recovery, Acoustic Healing in Traditional Medicine, became required reading in psychology programs. Universities established new departments bridging indigenous knowledge with neuroscience. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology created the first chair in traditional healing acoustics, which Sarah proudly declined to accept. "I belong in the field," she'd explained, "not behind a desk." Instead, she traveled constantly, visiting centers, training new acoustic healers, and documenting emerging applications. Her latest project involved working with firefighters experiencing unique PTSD from civilian rescue missions where they couldn't save everyone. The firefighting connection led to an unexpected discovery. Veterans trained in Eagle Canyon methods made exceptional emergency responders because they'd learned to maintain calm within chaos. Several healing centers began cross-training programs. Veterans teaching emergency protocols to responders helping veterans apply crisis management skills to civilian life. Thomas had evolved into something the Apache language couldn't fully capture until elders created a new term, bridge walker. He moved between military bases and reservations, mainstream hospitals and sacred sites, government officials and medicine people. His presence alone often initiated healing, warriors sensing in him proof that they too could emerge whole. But perhaps his greatest legacy was the Young Warriors program. Every summer, Apache youth preparing for military service spent 2 weeks learning the songs that would protect their spirits through whatever they encountered. They returned home on leave to share ceremonies that helped them process deployments while maintaining sacred connections. By the 10th anniversary, over 200,000 veterans had completed some form of healing journey through the network. The suicide rate among program participants dropped by 78%. Marriage success rates climbed to 40% above national averages. Most remarkably, 89% of graduates reported helping other veterans find healing paths, creating an exponential effect that statistics struggled to map. The medical community, once skeptical, now actively collaborated with indigenous healers. Neurologists identified specific brainwave patterns associated with traditional healing songs. Therapists incorporated acoustic healing principles into clinical practice. Insurance providers, seeing consistent positive outcomes, began covering culturally adapted treatments. Yet, for all its scientific validation, the work remained sacred. Warriors still approached the cave with offerings, singing ancient melodies, before entering darkness to find light. 50 Apache still witnessed transformation ceremonies, though now many participants were themselves grandsons and granddaughters of the original 50. In Red Springs, Murphy's trading post had become the Warrior Welcome Center. Old Murphy had passed peacefully, but his nephew Johnny maintained the legacy, greeting veterans, offering coffee and connection, directing them to resources with the same gentle understanding his uncle had shown Thomas that first day. During the anniversary celebration, Murphy's new guest book revealed entries from veterans around the world. A note from Daniel Martinez, the Army Ranger whose acoustic therapy breakthrough had inspired new protocols, came back for the 10th time. Each visit finds new healing, like peeling an onion that never runs out of layers. From Jennifer Chen, now directing the Women Warriors Project, taught 14 female veterans the songs this year. Watched them find themselves in ancient melodies. The grandmothers were right. Healing multiplies women's strength. The final entry, unsigned but unmistakably from Thomas's hand. 10 years, 50 Apache became thousands. One voice became a chorus. One cave became countless sanctuaries. One warrior's darkness became countless others' light. The songs keep working their magic. The canyon keeps echoing our hope. That evening, as the anniversary gathering wound down, Sarah and Thomas stood together at the overlook where they'd First, watch sunset paint the canyon walls. Below, Grace led a group of children in practice songs, their voices rising like prayers toward the first stars. "Think your grandmother could have imagined this?" Sarah asked. Thomas smiled. "She probably did. Apache grandmothers usually know 10 years ahead what everyone else learns too late." They descended toward the sounds of the next generation learning, songs that would eventually guide their own children home. In the distance, drums maintained their ancient rhythm, heartbeats connecting warriors across time and space, carrying the eternal promise that no one walks the path of healing alone. Somewhere in the darkness of Eagle Canyon, the walls continued, their sacred work resonating with songs of transformation, holding space for miracles yet to come. The miracle that had begun with 50 Apache witnesses had multiplied beyond counting, but its essence remained unchanged, that healing, like sound, travels farthest when it touches other hearts. As night fully descended, the last sounds to echo. Through the canyon were children's voices learning the welcome song, the ones who would keep the tradition alive for the warriors not yet born, for the battles not yet fought, for the healing always necessary when mothers and daughters, fathers and sons come home changed from serving what they love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.